Welcome to Perfect-ish, where it's not about having perfect time management, but about perfecting your relationship with time. I'm your host, Callie Brigham, and every week we'll talk all things time and how to maximize it without burnout or guilt. Whether we're chatting with an expert or I'm sharing my 20 years of time management experience, you'll learn simple strategies to make every moment count. Here, it's all about getting close to perfect-ish. So let's synchronize our watches and dive in. Hi, friend. Welcome back to Perfect-ish, where it's all about time management for your beautifully imperfect life. So you know those people who come highly recommended by someone that you already know and trust? Well, today is that day. I know all of you are aware of my beautiful bestie, Crystal Hunsucker, and when she starts raving about something, whether it's a hair product or whether it is a new little tech trick, I am all in. So when it was Jenna this, Jenna that, Jenna, I was like, okay, who is this girl? So I wanted to bring her brilliance into my life and into your life. So as you'll hear, Jenna is the queen of helping people go from stuck to unstoppable. She is a genius when it comes, I think she's feeling pretty good right now, right? Because these are all the things that Crystal has said. She's a genius when it comes to habits. And I hear there's a little phrase that's floating around, little bits of better. I can't wait to jump into that. I think it's the most perfect-ish concept ever. I'm all about it. Little changes that create big results. And so I cannot wait for myself to have this conversation, and all of you too, with Jenna, who's a wife, a mom of 3. She's a habit ninja, and it's not about, again, it's never about perfection, but it's about progress one step at a time. So without further ado, grab your coffee, your notebook, maybe sticky notes, who knows, wherever you need to do so that you are ready to listen and take it all in. I know that her advice is going to just change us for the better. So from the Habit Lab, please welcome my new friend, Jenna Zint, to the podcast. Hey, Jenna.
Hi, Callie. Oh my gosh, best intro ever. I was like, can I just listen to that in the morning before my kids wake up?
We try. Well, I am seriously so excited. When I first start to make like my VIP list of who I want to talk to, girl, you know, we've been talking about doing this for a long time. You were at the tippy top of the list because, again, if Crystal says you're great, I believe it. And also the topic I'm kind of fangirl about too. So I know we're going to talk about habits today, but yeah, just tell everybody a little bit about you, Jenna, as we kick this off.
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited to be here because Perfect-ish probably embodies how I approach habits so well. So I was like, oh, such good overlap. I am a mom of 3. And I had a really successful business. It was actually an Etsy business making baby headbands and bows. It was called Turbans for Tots because we made these like cute little headbands that were called turban style. And we made little hats and sun hats. And I had it for 8 years. I started it when my first daughter was born because everything was bright pink and sparkly. And I was more of like, where's the linen bows? You know, like that was kind of my vibe and I couldn't find any. So I started making them and it just grew. In the first year, something went viral. So it was like exponential growth from the beginning. And at the height, we were employing 20 ladies locally. We had like a 1,200 square foot office. And I was mom and CEO, like kind of at the same time. And then COVID hit. And then, of course, the algorithms changed all the time. And our sales just dramatically went down. And we decided to pivot pretty quickly. Actually, untrue. Our sales were going down. And then all of a sudden we're looking at the last quarter of, I think it was 2020, and realizing if we continue, we'll actually be like a pretty big deficit for the first quarter of the next year. And it was like, oh, we don't like forecasting, like we don't want to do that. Like, is this even something I'm passionate about anymore? So we quickly pivoted. And within 2 weeks, I let everybody in my company go, which was the worst. It was like the actual worst because so many of these people, like I had a whole family working with me, a mom, her 2 daughters, her husband did some he would fix all of our machines. He was like techie. So he would like help us with our sewing machines. So it just had people who had been like family, and to give them 2 weeks notice that they no longer had a job and then your business failing. It's just the height of, I don't know, identity crisis, shame. How did I get here? Like lots of like a low moment for sure. And I remember we went from that big office to we kicked my toddler out of his room, and all of my kids were sharing a room, which no mom knows that that's not a great recipe for sleep, right? Like, okay, all three of my kids are going to be in one room. And as I'm like moving my place, that was the last thing they did is help me move from this big office to like our little bedroom. And my manager of the office at that time was like, how are you going to do this, girl? And she was not being mean or rude or unkind, but it was this really honest self-reflection of like, oh, I actually don't have the habits in place to run this. The idea was to run it until I sold it to like a sole proprietor rather than what it was. And it was this awareness of like, I've covered my own butt and my weaknesses by hiring people for so long. But now I just felt this like really sweet invitation from the Lord of like, you're going to do something again. You'll do something, you'll like make another business. Like it's who you are. Do you want to keep the same weaknesses and the same lids into the next thing you build? And it was like, you know how the Lord does those really honest reflection moments, but it's like your choice. And I was like, nope, but there's really only one right answer. I was like, yeah, I don't want to actually repeat and be the same person and the same weaknesses in the next thing that I build. And I think part of it was because it wasn't just pain that I was causing myself, but like all these people not having 2 weeks notice to find new jobs. It was very aware of like, oh, if I had been better at time management, more on top of my books, I wouldn't have been surprised. If I had meetings more regular rather than not having control of my, calendar, like there's a lot of, it's like death by 1,000 cuts kind of thing. And I think it was just plainly looking at the cost of not having my habits in line. So then in that journey of running it by myself in our spare room for months, I first got the book Atomic Habits, which everyone's probably heard of, and it blew my mind.
Literally my top, it is in my top. I mean, I don't even want to say 5, probably 3, maybe 2 books of all time. Okay, good. I knew we were destined.
100%, right? So I listened to it and then immediately started it again when I finished. And I think I read it 3 times in a row, just instantly. And then I went on a journey. Every book he mentioned in there, I just went and listened to. So it was like 4 months of this deep dive into behavioral science. And like, I didn't even know it was a science like that. Actually, psychology versus like this is overlap. And I was like, wow, there is, looking at how our brains are wired, we've been approaching as a culture change wrong. So I would just say the best way to describe what happened is I changed my approach to change. I realized that so much of my effort to get unstuck was really big action that was not sustainable over time. And then I would crash, and the amount of however far I fell, however big the crash was, I had the same amount of shame. And then it would freeze me from trying to start again or get back up because I was like, I don't want to do that again. I don't want to feel that way. So I'd say the biggest pivot was instead of is kind of ditching what I call the all or nothing mentality, waiting for big action or waiting until the season aligns or I have the spare time or the spare money, all these things. Like we're in this waiting game. And instead, like getting to the mentality of like, I'm actually not a victim to my season. What small action can I take now to invest? So I think of like habits as like little investments into all the areas of my life or roles that I embody. So whether that's a friend or a wife or a mom or like a daughter of Jesus, like I, regardless, can make investments into these areas. Even if my season looks different than it did last time. So I'd say that's how I happened. And then it's funny, Callie, but I feel like you're like me. When you find something you like, you tell everybody, you tell your whole friends about it. So I actually started a little book club and I made up a 6-week course on how to because I was like, everyone needs to know. And I rallied my friends and we laughed so hard. I got them, our schedules were all, like when you have really powerful women, their schedules are all over the place. So we met at 6 a.m. on Sunday mornings in my little office for 6 weeks. And I was like, oh, I wanted to do that. I just got such good feedback of, I think sometimes I love Atomic Habits and I love books like that, but the application of how do I fit this onto my life? Like, what does this actually look like implementing these principles was where the rubber met the road. So did that for 6 weeks, did another charge for my first group. And then later that fall, I actually launched this 10-week master course on habit mastery. I always tease, it's Holy Spirit plus Atomic Habits is kind of what my course is. Cause it's so much, I think what we don't think about is how much our thought life is a feedback loop for our behaviors. So a lot of areas that we've tried a bunch of things and we're not understanding why we're not seeing the breakthrough, there's probably a belief or some pain or something that needs to get healed internally. So I think that was a big key for me, realizing how much our emotions actually make or break our habits. So I'd say my habit mastery course is both. People come for the habits and then they're surprised by the thought work, heart work that goes in tandem with actually seeing lasting behavior change.
Girl, I would have been there at 6 a.m. I'm just telling you. I would have been right there with you. I would like and I have said probably ad nauseum on my podcast, James Clear, call me. Like that's kind of my like one of these days. And when he calls, we'll three-way you in. Like I just know it. James, call us. Now he's gonna say me. I'll say James, call us. Like I know for sure. We're destined. We're destined to do it. But I will say
good one-liners too. He's such a good author. Oh,
such good one-liners. And I will say, I like how you took it to the next level because I'm a Holy Spirit activate kind of girl too. So I definitely think that he doesn't address the spiritual component, and we are holistic people. So, you know, as I was thinking, as you were at your lowest and everything's falling apart, and I heard the phrase that you and your dreams, it wasn't dead, it was just buried, right? And when a seed is buried, then what is the idea of it? Like it's going to grow. And so look at what happened, Jenna, when everything that you thought and you knew was stripped away. And it was just this preparation for the conversation. Because I will tell you, I would not be having a conversation with you about Etsy stuff. That's just not the kind of girl I would buy it.
totally.
But it wouldn't be my conversation, but I would have a conversation and will and am having conversation all day about this. Okay. So here's the thing. I think this is really timely, literally timely for this conversation because we just started a new year. And I think that most people, when they think of the new year, they really think it's going to come down to discipline, right? Like I just have to make myself do it. And that sounds, I don't know, that doesn't even sound good. No, people don't like discipline.
It sounds noble.
It sounds good, but it sounds awful. So January 1st, it's like, and we wait, right? We wait till January 1st. We wait till Monday. We wait till the next quarter starts. We wait till, and we think, I'm just going to buckle down and do it. And then January 2nd, our alarm doesn't go off or the gym parking lot's crowded. So you're not talking about discipline when it comes to habits. What is the driver? You've already started to touch on it, but maybe let's reframe, as you've already been doing, the idea of a habit. It's not discipline driven. So what is it?
That is such a good question. I think it feels like, I honestly love the analogy of an investment the most, especially with this perception of starting so small. You know, it's not going to get you to the fullness of what your goal is. But I always think about it like, you know, that widow in the parable who she gave 2 coins, and then the other people who are super wealthy gave like bags of money. And Jesus was like, she gave all she had. And I like, that's what I'm honoring. That's what I feel like with habits, because a lot of us are busy moms and have a lot going on. So it's like, this is the investment that I have. I'm going to actually honor my capacity. I think sometimes we shame ourselves if we don't have enough to give, we don't start, or like if it doesn't look ideally like we think a habit or discipline or this area should, we don't start. But realizing like, actually, I'm not the secret sauce in changing my own life or my own breakthrough. I'm just meant to show up. And there's going to have to be a grace component that kicks in. So to me, a habit is a small investment to becoming the kind of person that I want to be. So I have like actual, that's part of where longevity happens, is when you tie them to like bigger vision statements. So for instance, I have been working out for 30 minutes. I call it movement because a walk counts, whatever. Yesterday it was rainy and I didn't get it in the morning. So I found a YouTube kids workout. That's what my kids do. And they're bouncing around, you know, like trying to karate kick sharks. And I'm doing burpees. And they've clued in because they know, they're like, Mom, are you getting your workout in while you play with us? And I'm like, 100%. But my point is, with my habit, the reason I found longevity is I have it really dialed in that I'm not trying to shame my body into looking different. I'm actually investing in the kind of grandma I want to be. And to me, like, it's taken months for me to work out like what's my why. But when I vision cast for myself, I'm not trying to like shame myself into like task mastering, like being a taskmaster, crossing something off my to-do list. I'm actually know that I'm investing in health, that when my kids are in their 30s, I'm going to get to be able to be the grandma on the floor or bike riding with their grandkids. So my long-term perspective of why it matters, how it's like tied into my identity is really where I think we miss it with habits a lot. A lot of times there's just one more thing on our to-do list and you're never going to find longevity there. You have to really tie it into who you're becoming and why it matters to find like the vision for it.
So to me, it sounds like it's a couple elements as we're getting started. Knowing and understanding why it matters, and maybe even reframing some of it. I like, instead of working out, it's movement, right? Or I
Mhm.
did hear somebody say they replaced the word discipline with devotion, because devotion sounds so much more positive, right? Like I'm devoted to something, therefore. So it sounds like there's some reframing. It sounds like there's some understanding where I want to go. It sounds like there's some of this small start. One of the things I said at the end of the year was not to start strong, but to start small, right?
Ooh, yep.
Start small instead. Okay, so those are the things that we operate from. Where do we pick the first one to begin with? Is there a method to this?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I would say that to go back to answer one more part or two more pieces of what a habit is, I would say the other thing is I always tease, I start offensively small. So that means 10 minutes or less. And why I use the adjective offensive is because it's got to be an ego hit on some level. Like you might not be starting small enough if it's not like, if you don't feel like this instant, I could have done more, I should be doing more. Like if you don't feel that, then it's probably not offensively small. One of the people I coach, she has some chronic health things and she wanted to dial in her Bible reading, but her mornings because of her health look so varied. And she had a lot of shame around that she was trying to dial in her Bible habit. It was like 10 minutes reading. Well, she finally had to scale it back to simply opening her Bible, and she like opening her Bible was success. And she said, every morning I would think, yep, this is offensively small because I'm offended that this is just the fullness of my habit. But then the beautiful part is she's been able to scale. You have to remind yourself where you start is not where you're going to end up or where you finish. But there is a great James Clear line. He said, mastering the art of showing up. That's what the point of that starter step is you're just carving a new path into your schedule, into your brain, and then you get to upgrade. When you don't miss a day, that's when you get permission to make it a little more. It's like, oh, your habit has roots because it's just dialed. Now you're allowed to upgrade to more. But so starting offensively small will be one thing, having your why really clear as to what, like long-term, what it matters. And then the next thing I would say is having a very clear when, like a cue. People call it different things. A cue in your schedule, an anchor moment. So it's habit stacking. There's so many different lingo for it, but it just means, I love the phrase. One of the things I'll say is, if it could be whenever, it's often never. And for us, when it's 5 or 10 minutes, we're like, great, I could do it whenever in my day, but whenever never happens. So getting really clear about when you're going to do it. So for instance, anchor moments, I actually think are the most strongest by things that don't change in your day. So I would say morning routine and nighttime. I think of those two things as the bookends of your day that are easiest to stack really consistent habits, like small habits on top of it. So with your morning routine, people will be like, great, when I wake up, I'll do, 5 minutes of Bible reading. I'm like, no, that's too general still. So do you want to do it while after you get your coffee, before your coffee, while your coffee's brewing, while your dog's out using the restroom, after you shut the door? I have a 10-minute cleanup where I clean up the breakfast area, because after my kids leave school every day, it looks like the rapture happened in our kitchen. And I'm like, oh my gosh, why is there a hairbrush in the fridge? I don't understand what happened. So I take 10 minutes to clean up. But in doing so, my cue is when I shut the door after I say goodbye to my kids, I immediately turn around and do it. Because if I just say whenever, all of a sudden I'm doing a load of laundry and then I'm answering that email and it never happened. So you have to really dial it in when. That would be the other components. But then your other question of like starting so small, where do you begin? I actually think of habits as like antidotes to pain points in your life. So the area of your life that you're experiencing the most pain is probably where you're going to want to start your investment. And there's usually a few. I would not recommend. I actually have a free habit tracker that I included. If you'll add in the show notes if they want to download. Not doing more than 3 offensively small habits at a time. That's like the limit, really, for our capacity. So that being said, picking the 3 areas, you can think of them like morning routine, your relationship with the Lord, movement, nutrition, finances. I call them house habits, relationship habits, emotional habits, Or some people like to think of the different roles they embody. So, like I said before, like your role with yourself, your role as a mother, your role as a wife, your role as a friend, whatever. You can think of it either terms, but I would pick the top 3 areas that you are not enjoying your current results in those areas where you're in the most pain. And then that's the beautiful part where I think habits, I actually find so much hope in habits because you don't have to stay stuck. There's actually something you can do to invest in different results by building really small habits in those areas.
I think that's really smart because many times we take on a habit because it sounds good or that's what everybody else is doing or it's trending or it's viral or we read it in a book. But in reality, we might actually be okay in that area and you're decent. We might not have a lot of pain, but there's something else. And then when we fall short in that first one and we still have the pain point in the second one, like no wonder we are feeling the guilt and the burnout and the like, why even try? Right. I
Yep.
have a feeling there's a lot of why even try because I've tried it before, but maybe we weren't doing it with all these little ideas that you gave us, the cues, the when, the figuring out our pain points
Yeah, totally.
effectively. Yes.
And
And
I
I
would
will
say
say,
most people, though, haven't done one of those 3. And if you have, and you're like, I still have done all those things, then my next, whenever I work with people, like one-on-one as a habit coach, I'm like, that means that there is an unconscious belief or some kind of thought habit that you have that is undermining your behavior efforts. So I kind of, the recycle, reuse, arrow loop where it's like, it's a cycle. It's supposed to be. I think of that with our thought and behavior habits. Most people only think of habits as behaviors, but as Christians, we know that we're meant to renew our mind and it's an ongoing process. And I'm like, so labeling it thought habits made it a lot more tangible for me to figure out how to go after changing and renewing my mind. So what I would say is when people feel a little hopeless because they've tried, if they have tried a win, if they have tried less than 10 minutes, if they have gotten a really good dialed in why, then I'd be like, oh, you're actually probably, there's something that you're believing to be true that is sabotaging your efforts to change here. But I think the beautiful part, specifically as believers, like there's always hope. Why do we have hope for answered prayers in that area or for God to break it in that area? But we almost relegate some of these like habit areas as too practical or too logistical for God to care. Like, because these are some of the answers when I've asked people, they're like, but it's too small or it's too basic. Like, that's not enough to worry God. I'm like, no, actually, any area of your life that doesn't have hope doesn't actually reflect what God's plans are for you that life. So, like, get your hopes back up. That breakthrough is possible. And it's like for those areas too, that would be like one of the starter steps, I would say, if looking at thought habits. Then going, for me, one of the areas that I have had the hardest time getting breakthrough personally is my eating habits because I actually have my I've been meal planning and prepping for 2 years. I have it dialed every Sunday. I have all these healthy options. It's individually. It's like a thing of beauty, my fridge. So then people are like, what do you mean you don't have your eating habits dialed? And I am an emotional eater. When I feel anxious about admin stuff specifically or tedious things, I go to sugar or whatever's on hand. Popcorn or sugar. If I'm being fully transparent,
popcorn with M&Ms in it. Now we're talking. Like,
I do homemade kettle corn, so pretty much the same thing.
exactly.
But my point is, I had to, like, after trying to build all these habits, I had to get more curious. So I truly actually invited the Holy Spirit, like, where is this coming from? Like, what am I not seeing? Can you reveal something to me? And I just saw, like, that was actually when I got one of the breakthroughs of like, oh, the trend, if I can stay curious and not get judgmental, because that's actually a huge part of what I teach is a lot of times in our awareness, we instantly go to this judge mode. And with the judge mode, it's so black or white, it's pass or fail. That's not where grace lives. But in that judgment, shame and contempt is what comes on the heels of those verdicts. Are you doing good or bad? Are you failing? Are you thriving in this area? And the interesting part is in your brains, so the psychology, like the studies have shown that when you use shame, you actually disassociate. It reminds me of like the Garden of Eve, where Adam and Eve, like after they sinned, they hid from the Lord. So then they couldn't actually get the connection they needed. Where I'm like, that's what we do when we notice trends that aren't working in our own lives and we judge ourselves for failing. You know what to do. Like, it's the subtle shame. Like, adults should have this figured out, or so-and-so has been doing this for years. What's your problem? You should have, would have, could have. Like, any of that is the subtle shame that we think is actually motivating ourselves to change, but it's part of the toxic thought habits that are hindering our behavior. So I feel like you always have a choice. When you notice yourself not finding success or kind of having repeated slip ups in this area, you can be a judge or you can be a scientist. But the scientist chooses curiosity. The judge is only like perception is contempt or shame. It's so black or white. Where the scientist just gets curious. So like I was using that example of my own food. When I stayed curious, I realized that's when I actually got a lot of good data of like, oh, actually all of my trip, it's not my choices of meals. I actually have solved that. It's just my snacking. And then I got more curious and I was like, what am I choosing to snack? And I'm like, okay, it's just sugar. That makes sense. I know what sugar does to your brain. It's a hyper stimulant. It's like a dopamine. It's like the equivalent of like all these stats. I was able to have a lot more grace for I get why it's harder for you to break it. And then I got a little more curious and I was like, oh, it's actually all of my times that I have to do really tedious things that I feel overwhelmed. It's my reward when I'm having to like dig deeper and I don't feel like I can do it. So instead, there's for me just staying in that curious realm. I've gotten so much breakthrough with the Holy Spirit and the Lord getting healing that I need versus just putting a Band-Aid on it. I think a lot of times we're like, just do the thing, just stop eating sugar. You know the right answer, do another detox. And it's like, oh, actually, I want to grow at the pace of grace because there's so much healing. Like there's infinite amount of hope for me, any part of me that is broken and needs a dad. Like there's always access if I'm willing to sit with it rather than do my quick fix instead that I've been doing for so long. So that was a big perspective shift for me in areas that I hadn't found success. Stay curious, be a scientist, and then invite actually grace to get healing versus contempt of you're still here, you're still stuck. Like, no, actually, that's not how the Lord sees it at all.
I think I had a huge epiphany as you were talking, which is so crazy because, again, I feel like I have lived in this habit world and enjoyed it for so many years. It's just something that I find fascinating and I want to be better at and I want to grow in. I don't know. I'm just going to tell myself. I don't know that I really ever thought about thought habits. How weird is that? I mean,
that makes a lot of sense to me.
I don't know that I did. And I don't think I am the only one. When you started to talk, I was like, wait a minute. When I think about habits, I think about the action or the behavior, right? The flossing of your teeth or the prayer time or the, prepping your clothes before the next day or whatever. Because I really do like to do things that my future self will thank me for. And that's how I think of habits too, right? I will thank myself tomorrow that I did this today. So I'm going to do this today. But Jenna, I think I just want to pause for a second in that awareness and that aha, that I think that the thought habits are the drivers for everything else. Tell me I'm not the only one that is like, whoa, that's the secret sauce right there.
Callie, it's so true. So when I do my master course, when people at the end, when they're ending, I'm like, okay, what did you think you were getting versus what did you get out of this? And 100% of the answers were, I thought I was just going to change my behavior, but my thought life is entirely different. Like I didn't have just a behavior problem. I had a thought habit problem that I had no idea was undermining my efforts to change.
So, gosh, that's so good. And I have another thought too that I wonder if people either struggle with or maybe resist when it comes to that. I think some people think that habits are restrictive, right?
Yeah.
That like it's boring and restrictive and I have to do the same thing all the time. And I just like to have a good time and go with the flow. And I don't want it to look the same every day. So how do we make habits fun? Where's the freedom in it? Where's the fun in it? What do you think about that?
Oh, 100%. So I am the personality type. I love spontaneity. I love on the fly. Last night, I hosted 60 plus people at my house doing caroling, all lit up. I had a hot chocolate bar. Like, I love fun. But what I had to come to terms with, especially in that moment I told you guys about when my business was ending, was that I thought you had to choose between spontaneity and connection and discipline or organization. But I realized when I looked at it honestly, the level of like the lack of structure in my life actually cost my connection because I was living at such chaos because I refused to plan. So I have started to think of structure instead like the trellis to hold up my life. What you should not encounter, which I think a lot of us who maybe are more wired like me, who are kind of resistant, that's one of the reasons I talk about habits, because it was such a Saul to Paul conversion where I was not that girl. I'm not type A. I like flexibility. I like spontaneity. But I realized like, oh, I'm not being honest about the chaos actually costing connection in my life where I think I'm being most free. It's actually, there's a cost to it. So what I think about when you think about structure and habits is they're not, when you encounter your life, the best use of a habit and structure is that it's holding up the vibrant life, the life with a ton of fruit that's obviously thriving. It is not structured forward. If you were to see the trellis first and a really like lame plant, that's not where structure is its best. I think a lot of us have this mentality of structure as a cage. Like if you think about a dog in a cage, it's limits, you're boxed in, where I'm like, no, actually the right amount of structure will change differently, Callie, for you than it is for me. It is not a one size fits all. That actually doesn't make sense. And that's where a lot of us have found such restriction, or frankly, some of us in our childhoods saw people in our lives choose it over us, and we got this resistance. So I'd say like get curious about where your relationship with structure came from. But the idea of like, it's actually meant to be the trellis to support a vibrant life. It's not the end all be all, nor are we're fooling ourselves like thinking about a tomato plant without a support system. It can't support maybe like one or two tomatoes, but with a little bit of a support system. And then like you touched on something too about consistency. I think a lot of times we have a misnomer of consistency for perfect. Like I tease that perfectionism is kind of the ugly stepsister of consistency. Consistency is enough of similar direction, like effort in the same direction. It is not the sameness. It's not cookie cutter. And then even me, I actually have a little mini course that is called Habit Reboot, Revive Your Routines, because what I do is every season I sit down with the Lord and I have a little prayer time and I'm like, what is our word for this season? Like, what am I meant to focus on? And I actually recalibrate my priorities with my habits every season to match what my purpose is for that season. Because if I try to be, it reminds me of like being old wineskin. If I keep the same habits for 3 years, I've probably missed out on some seasonality in my life that's meant to happen. Like if you just look outside, like right now, all the trees that were stunning, like we have a fruit tree, we have a pear tree and an apple tree. Like 2 months ago, they looked entirely different than they do now. So why am I holding myself to the same standard? So instead of thinking like, oh, no structure or all like sameness, perfection, I'm like, what if we actually sync up and reassess every season what our priorities are and then align our habits accordingly? And what it doesn't mean is that I don't invest in my health in one season or another. But what it does mean for me specifically, that's why I do the 30 minutes of movement is my habit, because I actually let it look different in every season. So I'm 3 years into training for mini triathlons every summer. So that takes a way bigger piece of my life in the summer than my fitness habit does in the winter. In the winter, it's 15 minutes away and then usually a 15-minute walk, which is so different. But what the sameness is that I still have habits where I'm investing in my health, even if it looks different seasonally.
So brilliant, because I love, well, first of all, I love it's not a cage, it's a trellis. And I love the other ends of the spectrum, because I know I started off with, oh, it feels restrictive and but I also know that there are people on the other end where they are it is only on their to-do list or their checklist, and they're checklisting their life away, right?
Yeah.
And if we're not careful, it's just tasks. It's one task after another task after another task. I remember one day, so I love movement. That's a big part of what I do. And I probably was messaging you while I was walking. I do a long walk in the mornings. And I work while I walk. Well, one morning my phone was I didn't realize my phone didn't charge and my phone was about to die. And I was already like out of the house and on my way. And I looked down and I was like, do I go back? Like, I don't know how to do this without this. But then I thought, no, this has to be a reason. And Jenna, that walk, like I prayed the whole time. I looked around, like I saw the birds and I saw the sky and I saw, and I thought, okay, I don't want the habit to become so strong that I
Mm,
miss out
yeah.
on something. And so I thought it is okay to shake it up now and again, especially if you already have I already had this system in place, right? I already knew I was going to move my body, but I needed that reboot, that refresh to say, maybe once a week, I'm just going to leave my phone at home.
Ooh,
And I'm
yeah.
just not going to do that. I'm still going to do the habit of moving, but I'm going to mix it up enough so that it's just not checking things off a box or like a robot, right?
Yeah.
We don't want to be a robot in this situation. So anyways, that was really, I loved that analogy. That was perfect.
Can I tag on a little bit to that?
Yeah.
Which I love. It goes so hand in hand with perfect-ish and time management. I think the time management is kind of the secret sauce. But in planning my days and my weeks, I do about 70% planned so that I can leave room for the margin of the 30%. But the difference is when I didn't, so people who maybe I've kind of dubbed a spectrum for structure, your relationship with structure. And one end, if you hate it at all costs and avoid it, is chaos, which would be more me. And then again, think about it. Spectrum is, there's a lot of people in between. And the other end is the ones who worship it. And what's interesting about them is that they find their safety. They manufacture their own safety a lot of times with their structure. So that costs relationships. So there's a cost to connection on both ends where I tried it. Like, what does the middle look like? Where I have my systems dialed in enough that when these moments come, I can be present because I'm not playing catch up. Like that was the cost of living in chaos, nor the cost in worshiping structure where there's no room for connection to happen. So what I love is like when I'm playing with my kids and my groceries get delivered, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is why I do this, is so that I can be present to give what matters most versus like, it's like automating the more mundane things so that I get to give the best, Jenna, to the most important areas.
That's fantastic. One other thing too that it makes me think of is having that margin, that flexibility for whatever might happen. Every morning I do a surrender prayer and I just like open my hands and I go throughout my whole day, right? Because man makes his plans, but God directs his steps. So I just surrender all the things because I should have some structure in my day. Like I do need to get work done. I do need to have a meal for my family. I do need to have that. But I also know that sometimes I think I'm going to go left and God takes me right, or I think I'm going to go right and God takes me left. And so rather that, it's almost like I control that it's not in my control. I'm like, God, I surrender to you and I am taking control over surrendering it. But it does. It allows that moment that because there are those bookends in place, or there are some things that when things just kind of go off the rails a little bit or they vary, it doesn't mean that my next week goes off the rails or my next month goes off the rails, but it just has that space and that margin for him too.
I would say that's probably where people miss it the most with the all or nothing mentality. If they have to pivot for a while. So one of the things I really teach is actually when you make your habit, make a pivot plan. What will you do when you get interrupted? Because a lot of times we give our power away to interruptions when our lives are not meant to be like that. And if you have small kids at all, you have to get really good. But so many of us with small kids live almost victim to their interruptions. And then it creates, if I'm honest, some subtle little bitterness maybe when they interrupt my God time in the morning. I'm like, no, like I'm trying to do the thing and this is good and honor. I'm like, no, actually, I don't want that perception. So what am I going to do if I plan to pivot? What's my plan? So it takes the power out of feeling like, I don't feel a victim to the interruptions. Like, no problem. So like one of mine is when my kids interrupt with my quiet time, if they wake up early, I have a kid Bible by mine all the time and they're allowed to read it. Or I told you about how he woke up early in the middle of my fitness time. So I have my plan. So I'm like, no problem. Okay, this is what I'm going to do. Or if I can't do it in that point, I'll sneak it in before pickup. I'll go park 30 minutes early across the street and do some laps around that track before I get the kids. Like, so always, you're not a victim to life because you actually want to be present. Like you said, when those interruptions happen, whether they're divine or by the many humans in your life, you don't want to bemoan them. Like, that's not the point.
No, it's kind of like having insurance. It's like you have insurance for something. If this happens, then I know this goes into play. Plan B, pivot, whatever you want to call it.
That's so good.
Yeah. And that way, like you said, everybody's going to have an off morning, an off day, an off afternoon. But the sooner we can get back on track, then we're moving and grooving again. Okay, Jenna, I know I want more of you. I know that everybody listening wants more of you. So tell us, where do we find you? Where do we get more Jenna? Crystal, I'm going to have to write Crystal a note, maybe send her a Starbucks or something. She was right. Like, not surprising. She was right. But where can we find more Jenna and Habit Lab?
Oh, Callie, you're the best. Okay, so Instagram, I'm just Jenna at Jenna Zint. We'll write that, I'm sure, in the show notes too, but pretty self-explanatory. And then my website is pillar.io/Jenna Zint for that free habit tracker. And I also have, we have two podcasts. We have the Habit Lab on Apple, Spotify, all the normal things. And then my husband and I have a marriage podcast called Marriage Lab, because the concept is actually thriving marriages are built with a ton of intentional habits and investments. So it's like a very overlap world there for us.
Okay, so we will put all of that in the show notes. You can follow Jenna. I know you'll follow her to the ends of the earth because everything that you said today was of such value. And it comes from really, I think, again, your experiences, the highs, the lows, the roller coaster, where God took you, what he took you through, the fire, right? Took you through the
Yep.
fire, took you through the hard stuff. So as we wrap up, first of all, is there anything we forgot? Is there anything that I know we covered it all, but I just
I
want to
would
make
say
sure.
just start with hope and actually write like God into the area, and then make a little plan. Like sit down. I think of it like a formula. What's your when? What's your offensively small habit? And then, like you said, start today versus waiting. I think sometimes idealism just kicks us in the butt with when to start or what it should look like. But like, no, like actually you can have a life that's thriving regardless of your season. Like not regardless, like in your season. That's the beautiful part.
Yes, not in spite of or despite of, but because of, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so I have a little gift for you, Jenna. It is a pretend gift. So it is the gift of because we do talk about time on here. So it's the gift of a bonus hour. So I am giving you the idea of if you had an extra hour that did not come out of the 24 hours that you have with your kids and your husband and your business, 1 hour that you could do, Jenna, whatever you wanted to with it, what would you do with your bonus hour?
Oh my gosh. Hands down, no question. We live by 30 miles of walking trails. It's along the river. And I would bring my phone and earphones and have like time with the Lord. I walk for a portion of it, but I also actually really like road biking. I got into it. Anyways, so I'd probably have my bike stashed somewhere so that when I was bored of walking, I could get on my bike and then go back and forth. But for sure, I get lost in my thoughts and with the Lord while walking. And it's so beautiful. Just out my back door.
Well, two things about that. Number one is I hope and pray that within the next week or two that you do find time to carve out that hour to do it. You'll have to send me a picture of you on the trail. I would love to see that. We'll share it. And then second, someday, even though you're in California and I'm in Florida, someday I want to walk with you on that path. And then I want to take you on my path along the beach. And so we're going to have to make that
Yes.
happen. We're going to make
I
that
would
happen.
love to. Sorry for interrupting you. I'm a beach girl at heart. So that was truly where I come alive. Yep.
Perfect. And we'll be having our mastermind brainstorming stuff with James Clear. Call us James.
100%.
At the same time. Jenna, you've been a delight, my friend. Thank you so much for this. We prayed right before this, and I was like, thank you, God, for this alignment. And I am telling you, it is a divine alignment, and I have such appreciation. So thank you for being here.
Thanks, Callie.
Love it. Well, thanks everybody for spending time with us, some of your precious time with us today. And I hope that it gave you something to think about, to laugh about, maybe to breathe a little bit easier, because it's not about being perfect. It's about making progress. And really in that case, perfect-ish is enough. So we're just going to start small. So thanks you guys for being on. God bless you. Talk to you next time. Thanks for tuning in to the Perfect-ish Time Management Podcast. Let's keep the fun going. Follow me on social and join our Facebook community. And if you're ready for some one-on-one time management coaching to reach the top of your game without burnout or guilt, I'd love to chat. Book a free interest call using the link in the show notes or send me a DM. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please leave a 5-star review and share it with a friend who's ready to master their time too. Remember, we're in this together, making real progress towards becoming perfect-ish.